The arrogant Ocampan outpost commander laughed as he glimpsed the minuscule human scout ship Wasp on his viewscreen, not knowing that his mocking cackles would soon turn to agonized death screams as the puny vessel obliterated his frontier base. Captain Eugene Morris gripped the Wasp's controls, the tiny craft dwarfed by the monolithic enemy warships looming on the scanners. The vast Ocampan Empire had ruthlessly conquered a dozen races, their tech centuries beyond Earth's. But the underdog humans had a few tricks the overconfident aliens would never expect. Eugene's white-knuckled hands danced over the helm console, rolling the nimble Wasp in wild, evasive spirals as searing energy beams crackled past the canopy. The recon mission was already blown, the Ocampans wise to his intrusion. All pretense of stealth abandoned, he wrenched the ship into a twisting barrel roll, barely slipping under the convergence of a dozen deadly lances of plasma fire. Outnumbered, outgunned, the lone Wasp played a desperate game of cat and mouse at the edge of Ocampan space. The lives of billions rode on the precious scans of alien fleet movements stored in the ship's black box, if Eugene could escape to warn Earth of the looming invasion. On the outpost's bridge, Commander Varys pounded a clawed fist on his command chair in rage, the fragile human intruder maddeningly elusive. His mandibles clacked as he barked orders to the weapons crews. "Snare that impudent gnat in a tractor beam. I want prisoners to interrogate." His beady compound eyes narrowed as he watched the Wasp's exotic dance. When the troublesome ship winked out, Varys assumed a lucky shot had speared its heart. The Ocampan aimed a camera drone at the lifeless husk. Varys eagerly dispatched a boarding shuttle full of troopers to seize the crew. As the pod touched the Wasp's hull, hidden hull plates slid back. A pulsing spear of dark energy, an unholy melding of black holes and superstrings, stabbed out from the human ship's belly and cleaved the Ocampan craft neatly in two. Varys screeched in uncomprehending shock as the Wasp, very much alive, pivoted to rake his outpost with the beam. Warning sirens wailed and the deck lurched under Varys's feet as the hellish energy punctured his deflectors and chewed into the station's armor. Surprise had been total. Their foe, far from primitive, wielded physics beyond Ocampan ken. Singularity torpedoes, the most fearsome weapons in the Ocampan arsenal, belched from the outpost's tubes. Black holes yawned to devour the Wasp, but the human ship deftly snared the projectiles in tractor beams, using captured inertia to whip the swarm of miniature event horizons back at their point of origin. The twisted missiles ravaged the station, implacable gravitational tides pulverizing bulkheads and disintegrating decks. As his command tower crumpled around him, a disbelieving Varys was yanked out a plascrete wall into the screaming void, his ruptured lungs spraying ichor globules across his crater-pocked face in the frozen vacuum of space. Eugene slumped back in his chair as the outpost imploded in a soundless fireball behind him. The recon had devolved into a one-sided rout, humanity's first overt strike in a war for survival among the stars. The Ocampan stronghold reduced to cooling slag, the Wasp fled coreward, its databanks crammed with vital intelligence to aid the desperate defense of Earth. As the ship accelerated in-system, Eugene realized with mounting dread this slaughter had merely been the opening salvo in a mortal struggle between predator and prey. The hunting Ocampan wolfpack would be howling for blood to avenge the wrecked outpost, but the human lamb bared fangs of its own. What the aliens dismissed as an upstart child race deployed technology, generations more advanced than their own. This tiny ship and its valiant crew were the only thing now standing between humanity and the unending Ocampan hunger for conquest. The fight for Earth had begun. Commander Zakan's compound eyes pored over the scattered wreckage of the frontier outpost as his shuttle glided through the debris field. Charred Ocampan corpses tumbled through the void, mandibles locked in eternal screams. Zakan slammed a clawed fist on the bulkhead, nearly cracking the transparent aluminum. How could one pitiful human ship inflict such devastation? Back on the Ocampan throne world of Thaxis Prime, Emperor Morkan's inner circle convened an emergency war council in the obsidian halls of the palace. Zakan stood before a semicircle of grizzled Ocampan admirals and generals, their carapaces adorned with the scars of 100 conquests. He keyed a hologram of the ravaged outpost, eliciting hisses of disbelief and rage from the assembled warriors. "This is the work of a single human recon ship," Zakan said, his flanged voice dripping with humiliation and fury. "We woefully misjudged the Terrans' capabilities. They wield technologies we've never seen before, weapons that twist the very fabric of space-time." Emperor Morkan rose from his throne, towering over his lords in his ornate power armor. His voice boomed through the chamber. "We will make the humans pay 1,000-fold for their insolence," he growled. "Admiral Kror, take a battle fleet to their colony of New Terra. Raise their cities, capture their survivors. We must learn the secrets of their infernal weapons." Kross, a scarred veteran of the Empire's most brutal campaigns, snapped to attention. "As you command, my liege," he rumbled, his eyes glinting with anticipation. "The Terrans will rue the day they challenge the might of Ocampa." As Zakan watched Kror stride from the chamber to marshal his armada, he couldn't shake a sense of unease. The humans had achieved the unthinkable, a decisive victory against the Ocampan juggernaut. What other surprises did they have in store? The Wasp knifed through Earth's upper atmosphere, its hull still scorched from the ferocious battle. Below, the lights of sprawling cities twinkled like a million stars. Eugene let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding as the ship settled onto the tarmac of Earth Space Dock, the planet's central military installation. A raucous cheer went up from the crowd of technicians, officers, and civilians as Eugene stepped onto the Wasp's boarding ramp. They surged forward, eager to embrace the hero who'd struck the first blow against the Ocampan menace. Eugene fielded handshakes and backslaps as he pushed through the throng, his thoughts still light years away, reliving the desperate fight at the outpost. His reverie was broken by a gruff voice cutting through the cheers. "Captain Morris, with me now!" Admiral Stark, the supreme commander of Earth's space forces, beckoned from the edge of the crowd, his weathered face grim. Eugene followed Stark through the labyrinthine corridors of Earth's space dock, the Admiral's brisk pace belying his age. They emerged into a cavernous situation room where President Ivanov and her closest advisors huddled around a holographic star chart. The room fell silent as Eugene and Stark entered. Ivanov looked up, her eyes weary but resolute. "Captain, your heroism at the outpost may have bought Earth precious time," she said, "but we're under no illusions. The Ocampans will come for us. Their thirst for vengeance and conquest is insatiable." Stark leaned over the star chart, jabbing a finger at blinking icons representing Ocampan fleets. "Their armada dwarfs ours by an order of magnitude," he growled. "We can't beat them in a straight fight. Not yet." Eugene studied the map, his brow furrowed. "What's our play, Admiral?" "Scatter the fleet," Stark replied. "We'll lure the Ocampans away from Earth, bleeding them with hit-and-run strikes." He turned to Ivanov. "Meanwhile, we fortify Earth and churn out more ships armed with the dark energy weapons used at the outpost. If we can hold out long enough to close the tech gap—" "Aye, Madam President," Eugene said, snapping a salute. But even as the Wasp hurtled through the void toward New Terra, Eugene couldn't shake a sense of dread. They were racing against an implacable foe hell-bent on humanity's destruction. He just prayed they wouldn't be too late. The Wasp shuddered as another salvo of plasma beams hammered its shields. Eugene wrenched the ship into a corkscrew dive, narrowly evading the flaming wreckage of a human frigate. They'd arrived at New Terra to find a scene of utter devastation. Ocampan warships filled the skies, raining death on the planet's beleaguered defenders. "Hard to port," Eugene barked, rolling the ship to bring its dark energy cannon to bear on an Ocampan battle cruiser. A lance of obsidian fire erupted from the Wasp's prow, spearing the enemy vessel amidships. The battlecruiser crumpled like a tin can, spilling gouts of atmosphere and bodies. But even as the stricken ship tumbled away, a dozen more surged forward to take its place. For every Ocampan ship the Wasp destroyed, 10 more pressed the attack. Eugene gritted his teeth as the lone human ship danced a deadly ballet among the enemy fleet, unleashing concentrated hell at every turn. On the surface all was chaos. Massive Ocampan tanks, their armor shimmering with force fields, rumbled through the blasted streets of New Terra's capital. Soldiers clad in powered exoskeletons marched in their wake, plasma rifles spitting searing death. Eugene led a squad of Marines in a desperate fighting retreat, leapfrogging from one shattered building to another. They poured fire into the advancing Ocampans, dropping them by the dozens. But always more came, an inexorable tide of wrath and steel. "Fall back to the evac site!" Eugene roared over the din of battle. Shellfire exploded around him as he shepherded terrified civilians into waiting dropships. Men, women, and children screamed as Ocampan beams stitched the air, cutting down fleeing colonists in sprays of blood and bone. In orbit, the situation turned from dire to hopeless. Ocampan reinforcements jumped in-system, a vast swarm of fresh ships eager to join the slaughter. The remnants of the human defense fleet, outnumbered and outgunned, crumbled under the onslaught. "All ships emergency warp," Eugene ordered, his voice raw. "Regroup at the Ort rally point." As the Wasp peeled away from the dying world, Eugene thumbed the launch controls for a spread of singularity torpedoes, the ship's last salvo. The inky projectiles knifed into the heart of the Ocampan formation, erupting in blossoms of dark energy. A dozen enemy ships vanished into yawning black holes, crushed into oblivion by merciless gravity wells. More, caught in the periphery of the blasts, spun away helplessly, their hulls warped and buckled. It was a small victory, a spiteful parting shot, but it did nothing to blunt the enormity of the defeat. As the Wasp limped away, its hull pitted and scored by 100 scars, Eugene could only watch helplessly as the Ocampans swarmed over New Terra, an inexorable tide of conquest. In the days that followed, the grim news trickled in. Tens of thousands of human soldiers and civilians captured or killed. A dozen colonies seized and fortified as forward bases for the coming invasion of Earth. Over half of Earth's defense fleet, humanity's mightiest warships reduced to drifting wrecks. Eugene slammed a fist on the briefing room table, the pain in his hand a pitiful salve for the anguish in his heart. He thought of the innocents he'd left behind, consigned to the cruel mercies of Ocampan claws and blades. How many more would suffer and die before this war was over? Admiral Stark's voice cut through the miasma of grief and rage. "We bought time, but at a terrible cost," he rasped, his face haggard. "The Ocampans will regroup and resupply, then come for Earth. We must be ready." President Ivanov stood at the head of the table, her eyes hard as flint. "We'll make them bleed for every inch," she vowed. "We'll scorch the very heavens before we let them set one filthy claw on our homeworld." Eugene looked around the room, at the drawn faces of the men and women who now shouldered the burden of humanity's survival. They were battered and bloodied, but unbroken. In their eyes he saw the glimmer of defiance, the unquenchable will to fight on, no matter the odds. Eugene squared his shoulders, a newfound willpower burning in his chest. The Ocampans thought they knew war. They thought they understood the depths of human tenacity, the heights of human ingenuity. The battle for humanity's future had only just begun. Eugene stood on the bridge of the Wasp, staring at the swirling methane clouds of Titan through the viewscreen. The secret military base, carved deep into the moon's crust, bustled with activity as the remnants of humanity's fleet licked their wounds. "Captain Morris, report to Briefing Room Alpha," the ship's AI intoned. Eugene strode through the corridors, nodding grimly to passing crew members. Their eyes held a mix of desperation and persistence. He entered the briefing room to find Admiral Stark, hunched over a holographic display, his face etched with lines of worry. "We're running out of options, Morris," Stark said without preamble. "But I've got one last play. It's a long shot, but it might buy us the time we need." The hologram shifted, displaying a complex network of supply lines stretching across Ocampan space. Stark pointed to a pulsing red dot. "Zarkos Prime, the linchpin of their logistics network. We take it out, we hobble their war machine." Stark's lips twisted into a grim smile. "That's where our new friend comes in." A door hissed open, and two Marines escorted in a tall insectoid figure. The Ocampan's compound eyes darted nervously around the room. "This is Razul," Stark said. a navigator who knows the secret subspace corridors the Ocampans use. He's agreed to guide us through in exchange for his freedom. Razul chittered, his mandibles clicking. I will help you humans. The Empire has grown corrupt. They cast me aside like refuse. Eugene eyed the alien warily. Can we trust him? We don't have a choice, Stark replied. Prep your ship, Captain. We move out in 6 hours. The next day, Eugene stood on the Wasp's bridge as a small fleet of human warships slipped into the inky void of subspace. Razul hunched over a navigation console, his spindly fingers dancing across alien controls. Maintain this vector, the Ocampan hissed. Deviate by even a fraction and we'll be torn apart by gravitational shear. Eugene gripped the arms of his chair as reality itself seemed to twist around them. Hours passed in tense silence before Razul announced, We approach Zarkos Prime. Prepare for re-entry. The fleet burst back into normal space, and Eugene's breath caught in his throat. A massive orbital shipyard loomed before them, dripping with defense platforms. All ships, weapons hot, Eugene barked. Hit them hard and fast. The human vessels surged forward, dark energy beams lancing out to smash Ocampan ships caught completely unaware. Explosions blossomed in the void as the defenders scrambled to respond. Eugene led a strike team to the planet's surface, their dropship weaving through a hail of anti-aircraft fire. They touched down in the midst of chaos, Ocampan troops swarming towards them. Push to the defense grid control center, Eugene shouted, his rifle spitting plasma bolts. They fought through streets choked with debris, Ocampan battle mechs stomping forward on spindly legs. Eugene rolled under a sweeping energy beam, then fired a rocket that blew the mech's head clean off. Finally, they reached the control center. Eugene's team fanned out, gunning down the Ocampan technicians. He raced to a central console, fingers flying as he input the kill codes they'd extracted from Razul. Defense grid is down, Eugene reported. All ships commence orbital bombardment. He watched with grim satisfaction as human warships rained hell upon Zarkos Prime's infrastructure. But the victory was short-lived. Eugene's blood ran cold as a massive Ocampan fleet materialized around them, led by a dreadnought that dwarfed anything he'd ever seen. The bridge of the Wasp devolved into chaos as Eugene barked orders, trying desperately to rally his outgunned forces. Human ships exploded left and right, overwhelmed by the Ocampan onslaught. All vessels, this is Captain Morris, Eugene transmitted, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his gut. Break formation and make for the subspace corridor. The Wasp will cover your retreat. He cut the transmission, turning to his crew. Their faces were grim but determined. They knew what this meant. Take us in close, Eugene ordered. We're going to give these bastards something to remember us by. The Wasp plunged into the heart of the Ocampan formation, its dark energy weapons carving a swath of destruction. They crippled the engines of Kraw's flagship, leaving it a sitting duck for the last of the human ships to pound as they fled. But there were too many. Explosions rocked the Wasp as its shields finally gave way. Fires raged across multiple decks. Eugene stood at the center of his ruined bridge, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. This is it, he said softly, staring at the view screen filled with Ocampan ships. He turned to the ship's AI. Initiate dark energy core overload. Delay detonation by 30 seconds. As klaxons wailed and his surviving crew raced for the escape pods, Eugene sank into his chair. He thought of Earth, of all they'd sacrificed to reach this point. A sense of peace washed over him. Give 'em hell, he whispered. The Wasp erupted in a blinding flash of energy that consumed everything around it. Eugene, his ship, and a significant portion of the Ocampan fleet simply ceased to exist. Light years away, Commander Reeves stood on the bridge of her battered cruiser as it limped back towards Titan. Tears streamed down her face as she watched the last of the sensor readings from Zarkos Prime. He did it, she whispered. The crazy son of a bitch actually did it. But even as she mourned, Reeves knew the war was nowhere near the end. The Ocampans would be coming, their wrath terrible to behold. Humanity would need every ounce of courage and ingenuity to survive the storm that was coming. She squared her shoulders, wiping away her tears. There would be time to grieve later. Now they had a war to win. Commander Reeves stood on the bridge of the Wasp, his hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the battered remnants of humanity's fleet. The ships limped through space, their hulls scarred and blackened. Reeves's eyebrows furrowed as he thought of Eugene's sacrifice. "Status report," he barked. His XO, Lieutenant Chen, looked up from her console. "Ocampan pursuit has broken off, sir. Their supply lines are in chaos. We've bought ourselves some time." On Titan's frozen surface, Admiral Stark strode through a vast underground hangar. The air hummed with the sound of welding torches and plasma cutters as workers swarmed over half-built ships. "We're pushing the fabricators to their limits," the man replied. "But those new dark energy weapons are tricky. We're still learning how to mass-produce them safely." Stark clapped him on the shoulder. "Keep at it. Those weapons might be our only hope." In the heart of the Ocampan Empire, Emperor Morkan paced his throne room. His chitinous exoskeleton clicked against the polished floor. "Incompetence," he shrieked, mandibles quivering. "Betrayal." Admiral Craw cowered before him. "My Emperor, I—" Morkan's claw lashed out, decapitating Craw in a spray of ichor. "Take this fool away," he hissed to his guards, "and bring me the next one." For days the halls of the Imperial Palace ran slick with the blood of the purged. Morkan's power grew with each execution, fear cementing his grip on the Empire. But even as he consolidated his rule, Morkan's scientists labored in secret. Deep within an asteroid field, a moon-sized battle station took shape. Its surface bristled with weapon emplacements, while at its core pulsed the dark heart of Project Extinction. Morkan chittered with glee as he watched the station's main weapon power up. A beam of concentrated dark energy lanced out, utterly obliterating a small moon. "Perfect," Morkan hissed. "Now gather the fleet. We end this war once and for all." Back on Titan, Admiral Stark and President Ivanov pored over intelligence reports. "Project Extinction," Ivanov whispered, her face pale. "If this thing reaches Earth—" Stark's fist slammed onto the table. "Then we don't let it. We take the fight to them." Stark's eyes blazed. "It's our only chance." The human fleet assembled, a patchwork armada of newly built ships and refitted survivors. At their head, Commander Reeves stood on the bridge of the Wasp-2. "All ships, prepare for jump," he ordered. "Razul, take us in." The Ocampan defector's spindly fingers danced across alien controls. Reality twisted, and the human fleet plunged into the depths of subspace. They erupted into normal space in the heart of Ocampan territory. For a moment, there was stunned silence on both sides. Then all hell broke loose. Human fighters swarmed from their carriers, unleashing salvos of Singularity missiles. Ocampan ships exploded by the dozens, caught completely off guard. "Push through," Stark bellowed from his flagship. "All ships, concentrate fire on their command vessels." The space around the Extinction battle station became a maelstrom of energy weapons and explosions. Reeves led a strike force of assault shuttles, weaving through the chaos. "Brace for impact," he shouted as they slammed into the station's hull. Cutting torches flared to life, carving a path inside. What followed was a blur of close-quarters combat. Human Marines in powered armor traded fire with Ocampan defenders in the station's winding corridors. Reeves fought alongside his troops, his rifle spitting plasma bolts. They reached the reactor core, and Reeves's engineers went to work. But waves of Ocampan reinforcements poured in. Reeves took a glancing hit from an energy weapon, the smell of burnt flesh filling his nostrils. Outside, Admiral Stark watched in horror as the station's massive emitter began to glow. All ships evasive maneuvers. But before the beam could fire, the station shuddered. Arcs of dark energy crackled along its surface. The engineers had done it. They'd overloaded the reactor. "All ships, jump now," Stark roared. The human fleet vanished, just as Project Extinction detonated in a cataclysmic explosion of dark energy. When they emerged from subspace, cheers erupted across the comm channels. But the victory was short-lived. As damage reports flooded in, the terrible cost became clear. Stark's own flagship had been torn apart by debris from the explosion. In the aftermath, President Ivanov broadcast a message to the Ocampan leadership. "Enough," she pleaded. "We've proven we can match you. Let us end this madness." But Emperor Morkan's reply was chilling. "No peace," he snarled. "No mercy, only extinction." As the remnants of the Ocampan armada set course for Earth, Commander Reeves looked out at his battered fleet. They were all that stood between humanity and annihilation. Commander Reeves stood on the bridge of the Wasp-2, his eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the Ocampan armada's relentless advance. The tension in the air was palpable as crew members worked frantically at their stations. As the battered human fleet limped through subspace, Reeves pored over strategic data. He turned to his XO, Lieutenant Chen. "We need to bleed them dry before they reach Earth. Set up ambush points here, here, and here." His finger jabbed at key systems along the invasion corridor. Days later, a lone outpost drifted in the void of the Proxima system. Its distress beacon wailed into the darkness, a siren song for the approaching Ocampan fleet. As the alien ships moved to investigate, chaos erupted. Human vessels shimmered into existence, shedding their cloaking fields. Dark energy torpedoes slammed into Ocampan hulls, ripping them apart. Before the aliens could respond, the human ships vanished back into the inky black. Aboard the Ocampan flagship, Emperor Morkan raged at his subordinates. "Find them! Crush them!" But the humans were ghosts, striking and fading away. Dark energy mines detonated in their wake, shredding Ocampan ships unlucky enough to trigger them. Meanwhile, deep in enemy territory, Colonel Ramirez led her team through the bowels of an Ocampan supply depot. They moved with practiced efficiency, planting charges at key structural points. 30 seconds, Ramirez whispered into her comms. "Move out." As they sprinted for their extraction point, the depot erupted in a chain of explosions. Ramirez allowed herself a grim smile as they boarded their stealth shuttle. Another successful op. Back in Alpha Centauri, Reeves oversaw the construction of a massive defensive grid. Dark energy capacitors hummed with barely contained power as they were brought online. "Sir," a technician called out, "grid is at 95% capacity." Reeves nodded, his face etched with exhaustion. "It'll have to do. The Ocampans are almost here." The battle erupted with savage intensity. Ocampan ships filled the sky, their weapons blazing, but among them were civilian transports bulging with captive humans. Reeves' voice was cold as he gave the order. "Target the warships, ignore the shields." Singularity warheads streaked across space, their detonations swallowing Ocampan and human alike. The grid fluctuated wildly under the strain of the bombardment. "Grid failing," an officer shouted. "We can't take much more of this." But as the smoke cleared, the tide began to turn. Human energy torpedoes sliced through the weakened Ocampan formation. The defenders' sacrifice had not been in vain. Morkan, his exoskeleton quivering with rage, gathered his remaining capital ships for one final push. That's when Reeves revealed humanity's trump card. The Harbinger decloaked, its massive form dwarfing everything around it. Its main cannon powered up, a miniature sun forming at its tip. When it fired, the beam cut through the Ocampan fleet without effort. In the ensuing chaos, Ramirez and her team breached the Desolator's hull. They fought their way through twisting corridors, Ocampan and human blood mingling on the deck plates. They found Morkan in his command center, surrounded by guards. The firefight was brief but brutal. When it ended, Ramirez stood over the Ocampan Emperor, her weapon trained on his head. "It's over," she spat. With Morkan captured and their fleet in tatters, the remaining Ocampan commanders had no choice but to surrender. Victory, hard-won and bitter, belonged to humanity. Commander Reeves stood on the observation deck of the Epsilon Eridani shipyards, his eyes fixed on the vast expanse of space before him. The stars twinkled coldly, indifferent to the struggles of humanity. He rubbed his temples, the weight of command pressing down on him. Her soft chime announced the arrival of President Ivanov. She stepped onto the deck, her movement still stiff from her recent injuries. "Madam President," Reeves said, turning to face her, "you should be resting." Ivanov waved away his concern. "There's no time for that, Commander. Not with what we're facing." Reeves nodded grimly. "The Ravagers. Our victory against the Ocampans seems hollow now." "Tell me everything," Ivanov said. Reeves activated a holographic display, showing the path of destruction left by the Ravager scout fleet. Entire systems blinked out of existence as he spoke. "They came out of nowhere," he explained. "Our outposts barely had time to send a warning before they were annihilated. We threw everything we had at them, but—" His voice trailed off as he remembered the one-sided battles. Human ships torn apart seamlessly, their weapons harmlessly absorbed by the alien vessels. "New Venus," Ivanov whispered, her face pale as she saw the devastation wrought on the colony. Reeves nodded solemnly. "Billions dead. The planet's surface is practically molten glass now." He brought up another display, showing schematics of the Ravager ships. "Our scientists made a breakthrough. The Ravagers aren't biological. They're some kind of advanced machine race that exists in higher dimensions. That's why our weapons were useless. The ships were phasing in and out of our reality." Ivanov's eyes widened. "How do we fight something like that?" "We found a weakness," Reeves said, allowing a glimmer of hope to enter his voice. "A resonance frequency that disrupts their phasing. We retrofitted our weapons and managed to destroy the scout fleet." He brought up footage of the battle, showing human ships unleashing a barrage of energy weapons on suddenly vulnerable Ravager vessels. The Harbinger's massive cannon tore through the alien ships like a scythe through wheat. "A temporary victory," Ivanov said, her tone cautious. Reeves nodded. "Yes, what we found in the wreckage." He paused, steeling himself. "The scouts were just the beginning. They were meant to activate some kind of trans-dimensional gateway. The main invasion force is coming, and soon." Ivanov stared at the displays, her face a mask of steadfast perseverance. "How long do we have?" Reeves pulled up a countdown timer. The numbers ticked away relentlessly. "Not long enough," he said quietly. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what was coming settling over them. Finally, Ivanov spoke. "We've faced extinction before, Commander. We'll face it again. Gather every ship, every weapon we have. It's time to show these Ravagers what humanity is capable of." Reeves nodded, already formulating plans. As Ivanov left, he turned back to the stars. Somewhere out there, an incomprehensible enemy was coming, but this time, humanity would be ready. Commander Reeves stood on the bridge of the Harbinger, his eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the countdown to the Ravager invasion. The numbers ticked away relentlessly, each second bringing humanity closer to potential extinction. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to come," Reeves said, his voice tight with tension. He turned to face President Ivanov and the assembled military leadership. "We need to take the fight to them." Reeves activated a different display, showing the transdimensional rift the Ravagers had used to send their scout fleet. "We go through, hit them before they can fully mobilize." The room erupted in a cacophony of voices. Admiral Chen shook his head vehemently. "It's suicide. We barely understand their technology, let alone the physics of interdimensional travel." Hours of heated debate followed. Reeves could see the fear in his colleague's eyes, but also the desperate hope. Finally, Ivanov raised her hand for silence. "We have no choice," she said quietly. "Prepare your team, Commander. Godspeed." Days later, Reeves stood at the helm of the Harbinger as it led a small fleet towards the shimmering rift. The experimental drives hummed with power, sending vibrations through the deck plates. "All ships prepare for transit," Reeves ordered. He took a deep breath. "Engaging transdimensional drive, now." Reality twisted. The stars stretched into lines, then fractals, then impossible geometries that hurt to look at. Reeves felt his insides lurch as the laws of physics warped around them. Reeves gritted his teeth. Compensate, reroute power to structural integrity fields. They plunged deeper into the abyss between realities. Time lost all meaning as they navigated corridors of pure energy and probability. Twice, they nearly disintegrated as exotic particles bombarded their shields. Just when Reeves thought they couldn't take any more, they burst into a realm of fractured space-time. Colors that shouldn't exist painted the void around them. "Sir," the sensor officer called out, "I'm detecting a massive structure ahead. It's like nothing we've ever seen." The Ravager Nexus loomed before them, a sprawling labyrinth of interconnected hubs that hurt the mind to look at. It existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, parts of it phasing in and out of reality. Reeves wasted no time. Alpha and Beta squadrons commenced diversionary attacks on the outer nodes. Harbinger and Strike Team, we're going for the core. As chaos erupted across the Nexus, Reeves guided the Harbinger through a series of mind-bending maneuvers. They phased through solid matter, slipped between dimensions, all while evading swarms of Ravager defense drones. "Colonel Ramirez, status?" Reeves barked into the comm. "We've breached the outer defenses," Ramirez's voice crackled back. "Working on the anti-transdimensional shielding now. Give us 2 minutes." Those 2 minutes felt like an eternity. As Ravager ships closed in from all sides, the Harbinger shuddered under their assault. "Shields failing," an officer shouted. Just then, Ramirez's voice cut through the chaos. "Shielding down, you're clear to proceed." Reeves' hands flew over the controls, guiding the massive ship through a series of precise dimensional translations. They phased into the heart of the Nexus, alarms blaring, as reality itself seemed to rebel against their presence. "Targeting systems online," the weapons officer reported. "We have a lock on the core." Reeves didn't hesitate. "Fire everything we've got." The Harbinger's main cannon discharged, a lance of pure dark energy that pierced the fabric of space-time itself. The Nexus core didn't so much explode as it ceased to exist, taking a significant chunk of reality with it. "All ships fall back," Reeves roared as a shockwave of annihilating force swept outward. The Harbinger lurched sickeningly as they phased back through the collapsing dimensional rift, the laws of physics reasserting themselves with a vengeance. They emerged into normal space, alarms blaring and smoke filling the bridge. Reeves looked around at his battered crew, the weight of what they'd just accomplished settling over him. As the remnants of the strike force limped back towards Earth, Reeves stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the scattered remains of the Ravager Armada still lurked. The true war was just beginning, and it would be fought on a scale humanity had never imagined. The Harbinger limped into Earth's orbit, its hull scarred and blackened from the battle at the Ravager Nexus. Commander Reeves stood on the bridge, his uniform stained with sweat and grime, as he watched the remnants of his task force fall into formation around the battered flagship. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from Fleet Command," the communications officer said, her voice hoarse from hours of relaying orders. Reeves nodded, bracing himself for what he knew would be grim news. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing Admiral Chen's haggard face. "Commander, we need you back at HQ immediately," Chen said without preamble. "We've got a situation." Before Reeves could respond, alarms blared across the bridge. The tactical officer's fingers flew across his console. "Sir, long-range sensors are picking up multiple transdimensional breaches across the galaxy." Reeves felt his stomach drop. "Show me." The main view screen lit up with a galactic map, red dots appearing like a rash across its surface. Each one represented a breach point where Ravager ships were pouring through. "It's not over," Reeves muttered, his fists clenching at his sides. As the crew worked to compile data on the incursions, a frantic distress call cut through the chatter. "This is Governor Malik of Kepler 186F. We are under heavy attack by Ravager forces. Our defenses are failing. Please, we need immediate assistance." The transmission dissolved into static as the view screen showed real-time footage of the assault on Kepler 186F. Massive Ravager ships hung in low orbit, unleashing streams of plasma fire that carved molten scars across the planet's surface. The orbital habitats, once gleaming beacons of human expansion, now drifted as shattered husks. Reeves turned to his XO. "Prep a jump to Kepler. We're not letting another colony fall." "Belay that order, Commander," Admiral Chen interrupted. "We need you here to formulate a new strategy. The data you recovered from the Nexus raid might be our only shot at turning this around." Reeves hesitated, torn between the urge to rush to Kepler's aid and the knowledge that a coordinated response was their best hope. "Understood, Admiral. We're on our way." Hours later, Reeves stood in the war room at Fleet HQ, surrounded by holographic displays of the ongoing Ravager incursions. Scientists and tacticians pored over the data recovered from the Nexus, searching for any advantage. "We've found something," Dr. Patel announced, her eyes wide with excitement. "The Ravagers use a subspace resonance signal to coordinate their dimensional jumps. If we can disrupt that signal, we can trap them in normal space," Reeves finished, a plan already forming in his mind. He turned to Colonel Ramirez, who stood at attention nearby. "Colonel, I need your best infiltration team. We're going to hit them where it hurts." As Reeves outlined the daring two-pronged assault, the rest of the room fell silent. It was a high-stakes endeavor, but in the face of extinction, there was no room for half measures. "Sir," a junior officer interrupted, his voice shaking, "we've just lost contact with the Kepler colony. The Ravagers have overrun their defenses." Reeves' expression resolute. "Then we don't have a moment to lose. Prep the fleet for immediate departure. It's time we showed these bastards what humanity is capable of." The jump to the Kepler system was a cacophony of alarms and shouted orders. As they emerged from FTL, the full extent of the devastation became clear. Ravager capital ships hung in orbit like vultures, their weapons still firing on the now silent colony below. "All ships fire at will," Reeves barked. "Concentrate on their primary weapon systems." As the battle raged in normal space, Colonel Ramirez and her team activated their captured slipstream drives. Reality twisted around them as they plunged into the transdimensional rift, emerging in a realm of fractured physics and impossible geometries. "Stay focused," Ramirez ordered as her team fought waves of nausea. "We've got a job to do." They materialized near a massive structure that pulsed with otherworldly energy, one of the resonance generators. Swarms of autonomous Ravager sentries immediately converged on their position. Ramirez reached the generator, her hands trembling as she placed the resonance disruptors. "Charges set. Fall back." The effect was immediate and dramatic. In the Kepler system, Ravager ships suddenly lurched, their dimensional phasing disrupted. Reeves didn't hesitate. Human warships pounced on their vulnerable prey, tearing through hulls that had once seemed impenetrable. But even as they gained the upper hand, Reeves knew this was just the beginning. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "long-range scans are picking up more rifts opening. The Ravagers are pushing through in other systems." The shattered remnants of the Harbinger drifted in the void, its once mighty hull now a twisted wreck. Commander Reeves stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Defiant, watching the tactical displays with unwavering focus. The destruction of the Harbinger had been a heavy blow, but the gambit had paid off. Lieutenant Chen's fingers flew across her console. "Sir, the Ravager Gateway Nexus has been completely destabilized. We're detecting massive energy fluctuations throughout their fleet. 30% of our fleet is either destroyed or critically damaged," Chen reported, her voice tight. "But the Ravagers have lost over half their ships, and the rest are in disarray." The bridge crew worked feverishly, coordinating the movements of the remaining human vessels. Reeves watched as the swarm of red dots representing the Ravager fleet began to fragment and scatter. "They're regrouping," Reeves observed. "Prepare for their counterattack." As if on cue, the Ravager fleet surged forward, their biomechanical ships twisting and writhing in impossible ways. The void lit up with weapons fire as the two forces clashed once again. "All ships, concentrate fire on their lead elements," Reeves ordered. Don't let them reform their battle lines. The human fleet responded with a devastating barrage of dark energy blasts and singularity warheads. Ravager ships disintegrated under the onslaught, their alien hulls peeling away like burning paper. But the Ravagers fought back with savage intensity. A massive dreadnought, easily twice the size of any human vessel, punched through the defensive screen. Its weapons lashed out, vaporizing 3 human cruisers in rapid succession. "Evasive maneuvers," Reeves shouted as the dreadnought locked onto the Defiant. The ship lurched sickeningly as it narrowly avoided a stream of corrosive energy. "Sir, we can't take much more of this," Chen warned, her console sparking from a power surge. Reeves's mind raced, searching for a solution. Then he saw it, a weakness in the Ravager formation. "All ships form up on the Defiant," he commanded. "We're going to punch straight through their center." The human fleet coalesced around Reeves's flagship, forming a wedge formation. With a synchronized burst from their engines, they drove forward, directly into the heart of the Ravager armada. Weapons fire filled space around them as they plunged deeper into enemy territory. Ships on both sides exploded, adding their wreckage to the deadly obstacle course. "Now," Reeves roared as they reached the epicenter of the Ravager fleet. "Deploy the resonance disruptors." A wave of energy pulsed outward from the human ships, catching the densely packed Ravager vessels in its wake. The aliens' trans-dimensional technology faltered, leaving them vulnerable. "All ships open fire with everything we've got," Reeves ordered. The human fleet unleashed hell. Dark energy beams sliced through disabled Ravager ships. Singularity warheads imploded, dragging entire squadrons into oblivion. For a moment, it seemed as if space itself was tearing apart. When the carnage cleared, the Ravager fleet was in tatters. Those ships that could still move were retreating, fleeing towards the nearest habitable worlds. Reeves allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction before turning to his crew. "This isn't over. They'll regroup and try to establish footholds on our colonies. Set course for the nearest human world. We need to cut them off before they can dig in." As the battered human fleet limped towards their next confrontation, Reeves stared out at the star-filled void. The Ravagers were wounded, but far from beaten. The real war was just beginning, and he knew the cost would be beyond measure. Commander Reeves stood on the bridge of the Defiant, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. The shattered remnants of the Gateway Nexus hung in space before them, a twisted mass of debris and energy fluctuations. "All ships form up," Reeves ordered, his voice steady despite the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. "We've cut off their supply lines, but the real fight is just beginning." The human fleet, battered and diminished, took up defensive positions around the Nexus. Crews worked feverishly to repair damage and reload weapons banks. Reeves watched as swarms of hunter-killer craft poured from the larger Ravager vessels. They moved with an eerie, insectile precision, probing for weaknesses in the human formation. "Defensive pattern Delta," Reeves commanded. "Don't let them isolate any of our ships." The space around the Nexus erupted in a deadly light show as human and Ravager weapons fire crisscrossed the void. A nearby cruiser took a direct hit, its hull splitting open like a cracked egg. Reeves forced himself to look away, focusing on the bigger picture. "Sir," Chen reported, "long-range scans show Ravager engineering drones attempting to reroute auxiliary gateways." Reeves nodded grimly. "We can't let them re-establish their supply lines. Get me Colonel Ramirez." Moments later, Ramirez's face appeared on the main view screen. The Colonel's features were set in a mask of commitment, a fresh cut above her eye testament to recent fighting. "Ramirez, I need your strike teams to hit those repair efforts," Reeves said. "Use hit-and-run tactics. Neutralize those repair nodes at all costs." "Understood, Commander," Ramirez replied. "We'll make the bastards regret ever coming to our galaxy." Reeves watched as Ramirez's commandos deployed, their stealth shuttles weaving through the chaos of battle. The tactical display showed a series of explosions as the strike teams engaged their targets. Chen's voice cut through the din of combat chatter. Sir, we're picking up civilian distress calls from the frontline colonies. The Ravagers are pushing hard. Reeves felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. They couldn't abandon those people, but every second spent on evacuation was time the Ravagers could use to regroup. "Divert escorts to cover civilian transports," he ordered. "We need to get those people out of the combat zone." The battle raged on as human warships threw themselves into the path of Ravager hunter-killers, buying time for lumbering evacuation ships to escape. Reeves watched the casualty reports scroll across his display, each lost ship another knife in his heart. Just as it seemed they might have bought enough time, new alarms sounded. Chen's face paled as she interpreted the readings. "Commander, we're detecting massive transdimensional distortions," she reported. "The Ravagers, they're trying to force open a new gateway." Reeves stared at the swirling vortex of energy forming at the heart of the battlefield. If the Ravagers succeeded in bringing reinforcements, all their sacrifices would be for nothing. As his hand-picked crew boarded the experimental dreadnought, Reeves addressed the fleet. "This is our last shot," he said, his voice carrying to every ship in the human armada. "Hold the line. Buy us the time we need to end this, once and for all." The Starhammer's engines flared to life, propelling the massive ship towards the yawning mouth of the transdimensional rift. Reeves gripped the arms of his command chair as reality itself seemed to twist around them. "Singularity field inverters at full power," his science officer reported. "We're ready to flip the switch, sir." Reeves nodded, his eyes fixed on the alien geometries of the higher dimensional shunt before them. "Take us in," he ordered. "Let's finish this." The Starhammer plunged into the rift, leaving the familiar universe behind. The true test of humanity's survival was about to begin. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.